the
ancient
timeless
hills
ridges
of
of Wales,
a
a
land
realm
of
of somber
brooding
peaks and
mountains and
shrouded
veiled
woodlands,
forests,
where the
where the
boundary
veil
between our reality
world
and the
next
beyond
is
is as
whisper.
delicate as a whisper. For ages, this land has birthed tales of mystical enchantments and fabled creatures. Welcome to our realm, our legends, where today we venture into the essence of the Mabinogion, the storied saga of Wales. From the battle of the Crimson and Alabaster Dragons to the daunting challenges faced by those who felled giants, from the ghostly pursuit of the CWN and to the poignant grief of the ethereal queen, Rhiannon, prepare to unravel the truths woven into these ancient tales. Are you ready to cross into the otherworld? Let's embark. Pwyll, Lord of Dyfed, and his journey into Anne. In the lush expanse of Dyfed, where the hills rise like slumbering titans cloaked in green and the breeze carries the fragrance of gorse and heather, there reigned a lord named Pwyll. A man in his prime, he was honorable and equitable, with a passion for hunting that burned fiercely within him. This fervor set him on a course from which there was no return, a path leading beyond the curtain of the mortal realm. On a brisk dawn, with dew sparkling like gems on the tender blades of grass, Pwyll and his entourage departed from his grand court at Arbroath. They aimed for Glyn Cwch, a valley famed for its deer, its ancient groves murmuring secrets to the breeze. The chase was spirited, the hound's cries a wild symphony reverberating through the forest. Pwyll, his spirit lifted by the exhilaration of the pursuit, urged his steed forward, soon outpacing his companions, their horn calls fading into a distant echo. Alone, he followed the howls of his pack, a solitary hunter in a world of verdure and shadow. Then, a new sound reached him, a different, more haunting baying, urgent and otherworldly. It sent a chill through him, a forewarning that he tread on ground not wholly of this earth. Drawn by this spectral song, he entered a glade, where he beheld a sight forever etched in his memory. A majestic stag, its pelt as white as fresh snow, stood cornered. Yet it was not Pwyll's hounds that encircled the noble creature. These were beings from another plane. Their fur gleamed with a radiant, pristine whiteness, as if drinking in the sunlight itself. Their ears burned with the vivid scarlet of freshly shed blood. These were the CWN and the hounds of the otherworld. In a fleeting moment of reckless pride, Pwyll's noble arrogance overcame his caution. He chased off the ghostly hounds and set his own pack upon the fallen stag. As his dogs tore into their prize, a figure emerged from the gathering dusk of the woods. He was a tall, commanding presence, dressed in hunting garb that shimmered like twilight. A silver hunting horn hung at his neck, and he rode a mottled gray horse that moved with an eerie, silent grace. The stranger halted, his storm-gray eyes locking onto Pwyll with a gaze both majestic and seething with cold wrath. "Lord," the rider's voice boomed, rich with a power that seemed to resonate in the very air. "I know who you are, yet I will not greet you." Pwyll, taken aback by this lack of courtesy, retorted, "Perhaps your own standing does not warrant a greeting." "By the stars," the stranger replied, a dangerous edge to his tone, "it is not my own standing that holds my tongue, but the discourtesy and insult you have shown me. Never have I seen a man act with such thoughtless insolence. To drive away my hounds, who had rightfully brought down their quarry, and to set your own upon their kill, it is an act of profound disrespect." A flush of shame washed over Pwyll as the weight of his transgression settled upon him. He was in the presence of no ordinary lord. "Chieftain," he said, his voice now laced with humility, "what is your name? And how may I earn your forgiveness?" "I am Arawn, a king in Anne," the rider declared, his title hanging in the air like a pronouncement of fate. "Anne, the otherworld, a realm of magic and mystery, a place from which few mortals ever returned." Poole bowed his head. Lord Araun, tell me how I might redeem myself in your eyes, and I shall do it. Araun's stern expression softened slightly, a flicker of something akin to a smile playing on his lips. It is a simple matter, he said, though his words bespoke a task of immense gravity. There is a king in and whose lands border my own.
Will would turn his back to
Halfdan
her,
is his name,
a silent
and he is
vow
my
of honor
sworn
to the
enemy.
king whose place he had taken.
We are to meet in
and the
single
queen,
combat in a
her
year
wisdom,
and a day
never
from now at
questioned
the
this
ford.
strange ritual.
You will go
The
in
year
my
passed
stead,
like a dream,
Lord.
and the appointed day of
Poole
the duel
began,
arrived.
bewildered.
Will,
How can I,
clad
a
in
mortal
Araun's
man,
shimmering
take
armor,
the place of a
rode
king
to the
of
ford.
Anne?
There,
Your court,
awaiting
your
him,
wife,
was Halfdan,
they would know me in
a
an
formidable
instant.
warrior with eyes that burned
Fear
with
not,
a cold,
Araun assured
ancient
him.
hatred. The two
I will
armies
place
stood
my
on
form
opposite
and
banks,
likeness upon
a
you,
silent
and you
testament
will
to the
rule in
long
my
and
court
bitter
for a
rivalry.
year and a day.
At the signal,
You
Will
shall
and
have my
Halfdan
queen,
charged,
the fairest
their
woman
horses
in all the
thundering
realms,
through the
to
shallow
sleep
water.
beside you each
Their
night.
swords met with a clash
I,
that seemed
in
to
your
shake
form,
the very
will rule
foundations of the Otherworld.
When the time comes,
With a mighty
you will face
blow,
Halfdan.
Quill struck
But
Halfdan's
be
shield,
warned,
splitting
one
it
blow is all
asunder
that is
and biting
needed to
deep
fell
into
him.
the man's shoulder.
Strike him a
Halfdan
second
let
time,
out a cry
no
of
matter
pain
how
and
he
fell
pleads,
from his horse,
and he will rise
the water
again,
around him
his
turning a
strength
dark,
renewed.
swirling crimson.
And so, a
He
pact
lay
was
there,
made.
gasping,
With a touch
his
of his
lifeblood
hand,
ebbing
Araun
away.
worked his magic.
Chieftain, he
Poole
pleaded,
felt a
his voice a
strange
hoarse
tingling
whisper,
sensation
finish
wash
what you
over
have
him as his
started.
features shifted
Grant
and
me the
reformed,
mercy of a
his
swift
very
end.
essence seeming to
Quill,
twist and
remembering
reshape
Araun's
itself
warning,
until he was the
steeled
mirror
himself.
image of the
I have given you
otherworldly
one
king.
blow. I will
Araun,
not strike
now
another.
bearing the likeness
Let
of
another
Poole,
finish the
Prince of
deed if they
Dyfed,
will.
turned his horse and
A look
rode
of despair
towards the
crossed
mortal
Halfdan's
lands,
face.
leaving
He knew
Poole
then
to
that his
begin
end
his
was truly
journey
nigh.
into the heart
With
of
a
Anne.
final, shuddering breath,
The court of
his spirit
Araun was a
departed,
place of
and the long
breathtaking
war between
beauty
the two
and
kings
subtle
of Mabinogion
strangeness.
was over.
The halls were hung with
Quill
tapestries
returned to
that seemed to
Glencush at the
move with a
appointed
life
time,
of their own,
and there,
depicting
as
hunts of
promised,
creatures
was
Poole
Araun,
had never
in
imagined.
Quill's own form.
The air
They
was
greeted
filled
each other
with
as
music
brothers,
that was at
the
once
bond
joyous
between
and
them
melancholic,
forged in honor
played
and
on
trust.
instruments of
They
silver
returned to
and
their
bone.
true forms, and as
The
Quill
courtiers
prepared
were
to
a folk
depart
of
for his
ethereal
own land,
grace, their eyes
Araun
holding a
bestowed upon
wisdom
him the
that
title
spoke
of
of ages untold.
Anun, the
And
head
then
of the
there was the
Otherworld,
queen.
a name that would
She
follow
was,
him
as
for the
Araun
rest
had
of his
promised,
days.
the most
Back in
beautiful
Dyfed,
woman Poole
Quill
had ever
found his
laid eyes
kingdom
upon.
flourishing.
Her
Araun had
hair was
ruled
the
with a
color of
wisdom
midnight,
and generosity
her skin like
that had won
moonlight
the
on
hearts of
water,
his people.
and her voice
And when
was a
Quill
soft
inquired of his
melody that
nobles how his
captivated
rule had
all
been in
who
his
heard it.
absence, they praised
For
him,
a
saying
year
he
and a
had
day,
never been a
Poole
better
ruled,
or
and with
more
a just
beloved
and
lord.
steady hand.
But a seed had been
He
planted
hunted
in
with the
Quill's soul
strange white
during his
hounds,
time
he
in
feasted
Anwen.
in the
The
magnificent
memory of the
hall,
Otherworld,
and he
of
held
its strange
conversations
beauty
with the
and its
queen
deep,
that were filled
abiding
with a
magic,
curious blend
lingered
of
within
warmth
him.
and an
He was a
unspoken
changed
distance.
man, a prince who had
Each
walked
night,
in two
as
worlds,
they lay in the royal
his
bed,
gaze now
Poole
holding a
would turn
depth
his
that
back to
few
her,
could
a
fathom.
silent vow of
The
honor
people
to
of
the
Dyfed
king whose
noticed
place
it,
he had
a new
taken.
gravity in their lord,
And the queen,
a sense
in
of
her
a secret
wisdom,
held
never
close.
questioned this
The
strange
whispers
ritual.
began, soft at
The
first
year
like the
passed
rustling
like a
of leaves in
dream,
a
and
gentle
the
breeze.
appointed day
They
of the
spoke of the
duel
change in their
arrived.
prince, of the new
Poole,
title he
clad in
bore,
Araun's
Pen
shimmering
An
armor,
Mowen.
rode to the
What did it
ford.
mean? What secrets
There,
did he now
awaiting
carry?
him, was Halfdan,
The friendship
a
between
formidable
Dyfed
warrior
and the
with
Otherworld
eyes that
was a
burned
thing
with
of
a
wonder,
cold, ancient
but
hatred.
with it came an undercurrent of the
The two
unknown,
armies stood
a
on
sense
opposite
that the
banks,
veil between
a
the
silent
realms had grown
testament to
thin.
the long and
The
bitter
peace that
rivalry.
Quill had brought was a
At the
palpable
signal,
thing,
Poole and
yet it was a
Halfdan
peace that seemed
charged,
to hold
their
its
horses
breath,
thundering
a
through
silence
the
that
shallow
hummed
water.
with an unspoken,
Their swords
gathering
met with a
power.
clash that seemed to
And in
shake
the
the
heart
very
of this newfound
foundations of the
tranquility,
Otherworld.
a strange and powerful
With a
tension
mighty
began
blow,
to coil,
Poole
a
struck
sense that the
Halfdan's
true
shield,
consequences of
splitting it
Quill's
asunder and biting deep into the man's shoulder. Halfdan let out a cry of pain and fell from his horse, the water around him turning a dark, swirling crimson. He lay there gasping, his lifeblood ebbing away. "Chieftain," he pleaded, his voice a whisper, "finish what you have started. Grant me the mercy of a swift end." Poole, remembering Araun's warning, steeled himself. "I have given you one blow. I will not strike another. Let another finish the deed if they will." A look of despair crossed Halfdan's face. He knew then that his end was truly nigh. With a final shuddering breath, his spirit departed, and the long war between the two kings of Anne was over. Poole returned to Glyn Cooch at the appointed time, and there, as promised, was Arawn in Poole's own form. They greeted each other as brothers, the bond between them forged in honor and trust. They returned to their true forms, and as Poole prepared to depart for his own lands, Arawn bestowed upon him the title of Pen An, the head of the Otherworld, a name that would follow him for the rest of his days. Back in Dyfed, Poole found his kingdom flourishing. Arawn had ruled with a wisdom and generosity that had won the hearts of his people. And when Poole inquired of his nobles how his rule had been in his absence, they praised him, saying he had never been a better or more beloved lord. But a seed had been planted in Poole's soul during his time in An. The memory of the Otherworld, of its strange beauty and its deep, abiding magic, lingered within him. He was a changed man, a prince who had walked in two worlds, his gaze now holding a depth that few could fathom. The people of Dyfed noticed it, a new gravity in their lord, a sense of a secret held close. The whispers began, soft at first, like the rustling of leaves in a gentle breeze. They spoke of the change in their prince, of the new title he bore, Pen An. What did it mean? What secrets did he now carry? The friendship between Dyfed and the Otherworld was a thing of wonder. But with it came an undercurrent of the unknown, a sense that the veil between the realms had grown thin. The peace that Poole had brought was a palpable thing. Yet it was a peace that seemed to hold its breath, a silence that hummed with an unspoken, gathering power. And in the heart of this newfound tranquility, a strange and powerful tension began to coil, a sense that the true consequences of Poole's journey were yet to be revealed, lying in wait just beyond the edge of sight in the deep and silent heart of the Otherworld. Branwen, daughter of Llyr, her tragic tale and the warring giants. In the time of myth, the Isle of the Mighty was ruled by the children of Llyr, a lineage touched by the old magic of the giants. Chief among them was Bran the Blessed, a king so vast in stature that no house could contain him, no ship could bear his weight. His was a kingdom held not in halls of stone, but under the wide and watchful sky. His heart was as immense as his frame, filled with a deep and gentle spirit. By his side was his sister, Branwen, whose name meant White Raven. She was lauded as one of the three chief matrons of the isle, and her beauty was a quiet, luminous thing, like the moonrise over the placid sea. Theirs was a court held upon the great rock of Harlech, overlooking the crashing waves, a place of power and ancient lineage. With them, too, were their half-brothers, born of the same mother, Nisian, a soul of pure goodness who could weave peace between the most bitter of foes, and Enchanted, his shadow twin, a spirit of pure strife, a man who found a perverse joy in turning concord into chaos and love into hatred. It was this splintered soul, this agent of discord, who would become the architect of all their woe. One afternoon, as Bran the Blessed stood upon the cliffs of Harlech, his gaze sweeping the horizon, he saw a sight that stirred the waters of fate. A fleet of 13 ships, their sails like pristine white clouds, was making its way from the south of Ireland, steering a course directly for their shore. They moved with a regal purpose, their banners snapping in the sea breeze, proclaiming the arrival of a great king. It was Mat Holwick, the King of Ireland, who had come not with sword, but with a proposal. He sought to unite the Isle of the Mighty with his own green isle through marriage, asking for the hand of the fair Branwen. A council was held, and the union was deemed a worthy one, a bridge of peace to be built between the two realms. A great feast was prepared, a celebration of the newfound alliance. The wedding tents were pitched upon the shore, for no hall could hold Bran, and joy flowed as freely as the mead. But the news of this union, celebrated by all, had not reached the ears of Enchanted. When he came upon the festivities and learned that his sister had been given in marriage without his consent, a darkness bloomed within him. It was not love for his sister that fueled his rage, but a venomous pride. "Is it so?" he seethed to himself, his mind twisting the joyous occasion into a personal slight. "They see fit to give away my sister, a maiden of her stature, without so much as a word to me. By all that is sacred, I will unleash a dishonor upon them that will make this alliance a bitter taste in their mouths." Under the cloak of that festive night, Mabinogion crept to where the magnificent horses of Matholwick were stabled. These were the pride of the Irish king, noble beasts that had carried him across the sea. With a heart of ice and a blade of cold steel, Mabinogion committed an act of unspeakable cruelty. He fell upon the horses, slicing their lips back to the very gums, hacking their ears down to the bone, shearing their eyelids away, and severing their tails at the rump. He left the animals maimed and screaming, a grotesque monument to his spite. When morning broke and Matholwick discovered the mutilation of his steeds, his honor was wounded as deeply as their flesh. He prepared to depart in a fury, his dreams of alliance turned to ash. But Bran the Blessed, his great heart aching with shame for his brother's act, would not let him leave in anger. He offered
"Flower,
she
my lord,"
conceived a
the man
son,
replied.
Gwern, a boy who
Efnisien,
held the hopes of both
unconvinced,
nations in
went
his
to the
small
first bag.
hands.
He felt it,
But the
and
poison
inside
of
he found not
Efnision's
flour,
insult had
but
not
an
been
armed
purged.
warrior lying in wait.
It had merely
A cruel
seeped into
smile
the
touched
soil of
Efnision's
Ireland,
lips.
waiting
With his
to
powerful
sprout.
hands he squeezed the
The
bag,
nobles
crushing
of
the warrior's
Matholwicka's
skull
court,
until he
who had
felt the
witnessed
bones
the
splinter
dishonor,
between his
began
fingers.
to murmur.
He moved to the next
They
bag, and
whispered
the
that
next,
it was a
and the
weakness
next,
to have
until all
accepted
100 of the
compensation
hidden
for such an
assassins were dead,
outrage,
their
that
ambush
Branwen,
silenced before
sister
it could
to the
begin.
perpetrator,
At the great
was a
feast to
living
install
symbol of
Gwern
their
as the new
king's
king,
shame.
a fragile peace
Slowly,
seemed
cruelly,
to settle.
the whispers
The
turned
boy,
Matholwicka's
beloved
heart
by
to
all,
stone.
moved from his uncle Bran
love
to his
he
other
held for
uncles,
Branwen withered
receiving
and
their
died.
affection. But
He
when he came
commanded
to
that she be
Efnisien,
driven
the
from
man
his
whose soul
chamber
was a
and
knot
sent
of
to the
resentment
kitchens
and
to
chaos,
work as a
the
drudge.
fragile piece shattered
And to
into a
compound her
million pieces.
humiliation,
As
he
the boy
decreed
embraced
that
him,
every day the
Efnision's face
butcher, after
contorted in a
finishing
mask
his
of
grisly
sudden,
work, should
inexplicable
come to her
fury.
and deliver a
Perhaps he
stinging
saw in the
box
boy's
on the ear.
innocence a condemnation of
For
his
3
own
long
dark
years,
heart.
Branwen,
Perhaps he
the
saw the
daughter of a
union he
king,
despised
endured
made
this
flesh.
torment in silence.
Before anyone could
Her
react,
beauty
he
fading
seized
under
his
a
young
veil of
nephew
soot
by
and
the
sorrow,
ankles and with a
the daily
terrible
blow, a
cry
painful
thrust the
reminder
child
of her
headfirst into the roaring
In her
flames of the
desolate
great
prison,
bonfire.
she found a
Branwen
single friend,
screamed,
a
a
starling
sound
with a
of
bright,
pure,
knowing eye.
soul-shattering agony,
She
and
would
tried
feed
to
it
throw
crumbs from
herself
her
into
meager
the fire
meals
after
and
her
whisper
son,
her
but
grief
Bran
into its
held her back.
feathers.
The hall
Over
erupted
many
into a
months,
maelstrom
she
of
tamed the
violence.
bird,
The Irish
teaching it the
lords
sound
sprang
of
their
her
trap,
brother's
and the
name.
Welsh, caught
Then one
unprepared,
day,
were
with hope
locked in a
flickering
battle
like
for
a
their
dying
very
ember,
lives.
she
The
wrote a letter
fighting was
detailing
savage
her
and
anguish,
desperate,
a
and
tale
with
of
every
woe
Welsh
written
warrior
not in
who
ink,
fell,
but
the
in her own
Irish dragged
tears.
the body away,
She
casting
tied
it
the
into
missive
the
beneath
cauldron
the
of
starling's
rebirth.
wing and,
The
with
next
a prayer,
morning, a
cast it
silent,
into the air,
unkillable
bidding
army
it
of the
fly
dead
east towards
rose to
the
fight
Isle of the
again.
Mighty.
Seeing the ruin he had
faithful
wrought,
bird flew,
seeing
a
the
tiny
endless
speck of
tide of death he had
desperation
unleashed
against the
upon his
vast,
own kin,
indifferent
a
sky.
flicker of something new
It crossed
entered
the churning
Efnision's
Irish
heart.
sea,
Remorse.
battling winds and
Woe
rain,
is me,
until at
he
last
lamented,
it saw the
that
shores
I
of
am
Wales.
the cause of this devastation.
It found Bran
I will put
holding
an end
court
to the
at Clear
evil I
Saint,
have
and
created.
there it landed
He
upon his
disguised
great
himself
shoulder,
amongst the Irish dead and
fluttering
allowed
and
himself
chirping
to
until
be
it
thrown
was
into the
noticed.
magical cauldron.
The letter
Once
was
inside,
found,
he
and as
stretched out.
Bran read his sister's words, a terrible silence fell over the court. His gentle spirit was consumed by a rage as vast and towering as his own body. He let out a roar that shook the mountains and made the very sea draw back in fear. War was coming. A mighty host was gathered from the 154 cantrefs of Britain. But as the ships were prepared, it was clear that none could carry their king. So, as his fleet sailed for Ireland, Bran the Blessed waded into the sea, the cold waves crashing against his chest. He strode through the deep water, a walking mountain of vengeance, his harpists playing solemn tunes upon his shoulders. The frightened fishermen of Ireland saw a sight that defied belief, a forest of masts moving across the water and, behind it, a great mountain with a high ridge, on either side of which were two vast lakes. A terrified swineherd ran to Mat Holwick, who, after questioning the captive Branwen, learned the horrifying truth. The forest was the masts of the Welsh fleet. The mountain was her brother Bran, his nose the ridge, his eyes the two lakes, coming to avenge her suffering. In terror, Mat Holwick retreated, destroying the bridge over the river Liffey. But this was no obstacle for the giant king. Bran lay himself down across the river gorge, his body forming a bridge for his entire army to cross, uttering the famous words, "He who would be a leader, let him be a bridge." Seeing no escape, the Irish sued for peace. They offered to build a house larger than any ever constructed, a hall fit to honor Bran himself, and they would cede the kingship to Gwern, his beloved nephew. Bran, his heart softened by the thought of peace and his nephew's future, agreed. But treachery was the foundation of this new hall. Inside the massive structure, the Irish hung 100 leather bags from the pillars, one on each side of the 100 columns. Efnisien, his spirit forever attuned to deceit, entered the house before the Welsh host. He asked a nearby Irishman what was in the bags. "Flour, my lord," the man replied. Efnisien, unconvinced, went to the first bag. He felt it, and inside he found not flour, but an armed warrior lying in wait. A cruel smile touched Efnisien's lips. With his powerful hands, he squeezed the bag, crushing the warrior's skull until he felt the bones splinter between his fingers. He moved to the next bag, and the next, until all 100 of the hidden assassins were dead, their ambush silenced before it could begin. At the great feast to install Gwern as the new king, a fragile peace seemed to settle. The boy, beloved by all, moved from his uncle Bran to his other uncles, receiving their affection. But when he came to Efnisien, the man whose soul was a knot of resentment and chaos, the fragile peace shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. As the boy embraced him, Efnisien's face contorted in a mask of sudden, inexplicable fury. Perhaps he saw in the boy's innocence a condemnation of his own dark heart. Perhaps he saw the union he despised made flesh. Before anyone could react, he seized his young nephew by the ankles and, with a terrible cry, thrust the child headfirst into the roaring flames of the great bonfire. Branwen screamed, a sound of pure, soul-shattering agony, and tried to throw herself into the fire after her son, but Bran held her back. The hall erupted into a maelstrom of violence. The Irish lords sprang their trap, and the Welsh, caught unprepared, were locked in a battle for their very lives. The fighting was savage and desperate, and with every Welsh warrior who fell, the Irish dragged the body away, casting it into the cauldron of rebirth. The next morning, a silent, unkillable army of the dead rose to fight again. Seeing the ruin he had wrought, seeing the endless tide of death he had unleashed upon his own kin, a flicker of something new entered Efnisien's heart, remorse. "Woe is me," he lamented, "that I am the cause of this devastation. I will put an end to the evil I have created." He disguised himself amongst the Irish dead and allowed himself to be thrown into the magical cauldron. Once inside, he stretched out with all his giant-blooded might, pushing against the sides of the enchanted vessel until it shattered into 4 pieces, and his own heart shattered with it. The cauldron was destroyed, but the cost was immense. The war raged on until nearly every man, Welsh and Irish, lay dead. At the end of it all, only 7 Welsh men remained, staggering from the house of slaughter: Pryderi, Manawydan, Glyfew, Taliesin, Inog, Grudu, and Hylin. And with them was Bran, mortally wounded by a poisoned spear to his foot. Branwen, her heart broken, had also survived, but her spirit was gone. As he lay dying, Bran the Blessed gave his final, curious command: "Cut off my head," he told his 7 remaining companions, "and carry it with you to the White Mount in London. Bury it there with my face turned towards France. Along the way, the head will be as good a companion to you as it ever was when it was on my shoulders." And so the 7 survivors, with the grieving Branwen, began their sorrowful journey home. They landed at Aberlour in Anglesey, and their Branwen looked back towards the shores of Ireland and then towards the Isle of the Mighty. "Woe is me," she cried, "that I was ever born. 2 good islands have been destroyed because of me." And with that cry, her heart cracked in 2, and she fell dead upon the shore. Her companions, their grief now absolute, buried her there and turned to their grim task. They journeyed on, carrying the living, talking head of their king. For 80 years, they were held in a strange, enchanted stasis at Harlech and later at Gwales, a timeless paradise where the head kept them company with stories and wisdom, and all the sorrows of the world were forgotten. But this magical reprieve was not destined to last. One of the 7, Hylin, broke the enchantment by opening a forbidden door that looked out upon Cornwall and the world of men. Instantly, all their grief, the memory of their lost kin, the horror of the war, and the death of Branwen came flooding back. The spell was broken. The catastrophic war in Ireland was over, and only 7 men of the mighty host of Britain had returned, bearing with them the living head of their king, Bran the Blessed. Among these 7 were Pryderi, the noble prince of Dyfed, and Manawydan fab Llyr, the brother of the fallen Bran. Manawydan was a man whose spirit was as deep and shifting as the sea from which his father Llyr drew his name. He was not a warrior like his brother, but a shaper, a craftsman, a man of patience and profound thought. Upon their return, having fulfilled their solemn duty of burying their king's head on the White Mount of London, a deep melancholy settled upon Manawydan. He was now landless, his family shattered, his purpose lost to the winds of fate. Pryderi, seeing his friend's despair, made him a generous offer. "Man," he said, "though I cannot restore your royal title, I can offer you a home and a family. Take the 7 cantrefs of Dyfed as your own, and with them the hand of my mother, Rhiannon." Rhiannon, the once otherworldly queen, still possessed a wisdom and beauty that time could not diminish. Seeing kindness and honor in Manawydan, she agreed to the union. And so Manawydan, the man without a home, married Rhiannon, the lady of Dyfed, and with them were Pryderi and his own wife, the gentle Sigfa. For a time, a fragile peace settled over the land. The 4 companions lived in harmony, their days filled with hunting, feasting, and the quiet joy of companionship, the ghosts of the past held at bay by the warmth of their newfound family. It was after a great feast at the court of Arbroath that the true trial began. The 4 companions, full of wine and contentment, walked to the Gorsedd Arbroath, that ancient magical mound from which wonders and enchantments were known to spring. As they seated themselves upon its turfed crest, the world held its breath. A clap of thunder, sharp and sudden, split the sky, not from storm clouds, but from a clear blue expanse, and with the thunder, a mist descended. It was a strange, magical fog, thick and cloying, smelling of ozone and forgotten things. It swallowed the land whole, clinging to their skin and chilling them to the bone. Fearing this unnatural phenomenon, they rose to return to the court. But when the mist finally lifted, it revealed a world undone. The court of Arbroath was still there, its halls and chambers standing as they always had. But it was utterly empty. The guards at the gate, the servants in the kitchens, the hounds in their kennels, the horses in their stalls, all had vanished without a trace. They looked out across the lands of Dyfed, and a profound and terrifying silence greeted them. The fields were barren of farmer and flock, the villages empty of life, the roads silent and bare. Every man, woman, and child, every beast of the field and bird of the air, had been spirited away, leaving behind a beautiful, desolate wasteland. Only the 4 of them remained, alone in a silent kingdom. For 2 years, they lived a strange, phantom existence, surviving on the wild honey and the deer they could hunt. Their only company was the echoes of their own voices in the empty halls. Yet even in this desolation, they found solace in each other's presence. But eventually, the need for a life beyond mere survival gnawed at them. "We cannot live like this forever," Mabinogion declared. "Let us go into Logar, into England, and find a trade by which we can live." They traveled to Hereford, where Mabinogion, with his innate skill, decided they would become saddlers. He crafted saddles of such exquisite quality, with pommels of blue enameled bone, that no one would buy the plain leather work of the local craftsman. The saddlers of Hereford, consumed by jealousy, conspired to kill the 4 strangers. But Pryderi, ever the warrior, counseled a fight. Mabinogion, however, shook his head. "We will not fight," he said, his voice calm. "We seek a life, not more death. Let us simply leave." And so they moved to another town. And there, Mabinogion took up the craft of shield making.
Water.
He
Into the
fashioned
cauldron
shields of
went the
such
foam
beauty
of the
and
ocean,
strength, with
the dew
enameled
from a
faces
mantle
of
of
brilliant
moonlight,
blue that
and the
soon
breath
no
of the
other
sleeping
shield would
hills.
sell.
To tend this
Again,
potent brew,
the local
Ceridwen
craftsmen
required
plotted their
2
demise,
assistants.
and again
She found a
Mabinogion
blind old
chose
man
not
named
to fight,
Morda
but to
to
move
feed
on.
the fire, to ensure
In a
it never
third town,
faltered
they
nor
became
burned too
shoemakers.
hot, and to stir the
Mabinogion
cauldron,
would not
a
work
task
with
that
plain
must be
leather,
done
but bought
ceaselessly.
the finest
She
cordovan
hired a
leather
young
he
boy
could
from the
find
nearby
and
village.
fashioned shoes
His
of
name
such
was Guion
elegance,
Bach,
gilded with
Little
gold,
Guion.
that people
He
flocked
was a
to their
simple lad,
workshop.
with no inkling
But
of the
the same
cosmic
story
forces he was
repeated
being
itself.
paid to churn. For a
The
full
envy of
year,
the local
the 3 of them
shoemakers
kept their
curdled
vigil.
into a murderous
Morda,
rage.
sightless but
"It is
ever
always
diligent,
the same,"
fed the
Pryderi
logs
said,
into the
his
fire beneath the
patience
great
worn
cauldron.
thin.
And Guion,
"Let us return
his
to
arms
Dyft.
aching, his mind
We
numb
can at
with
least
the
hunt for
unending
our
rhythm
supper
of his
there."
task, stood
So they
stirring,
returned to the silent land,
stirring
to the lonely
thick,
court of
bubbling
Arbroath.
liquid.
One
The air in the
morning,
chamber grew thick
Mabinogion
with the
and
scent of
Pryderi
magic,
went out to
a smell
hunt.
of ancient earth,
Their
hot
hounds
metal,
startled a
and something
wild
else,
boar, a
something
beast of a
wild and
brilliant,
electric.
shining white,
Ceridwen would
larger
watch over
and
them,
more
her
magnificent
powerful
than
gaze
any they
ensuring
had
the
ever
work was
seen.
done, adding her
It
own
did not flee in
incantations and
terror,
charms
but
when the
led
stars
them on
were
a
right.
deliberate chase,
The day
always
finally
staying
came.
just ahead.
The year and a day were
The boar
complete.
led them not into
Ceridwen
deep
knew
woods,
that the entire
but towards a
potent brew was
strange,
not for
newly
her son.
risen building,
All the
a
magic,
great and
all
imposing
the
fort where
Arwen
none
would be
had stood
concentrated
before.
into 3 single,
The hounds,
blessed
barking
drops.
furiously,
The rest of
rushed
the potion
inside the
would become a
fortress.
deadly poison,
But
a
once they
venom
passed
so
through the
foul it
open
would
gate,
crack the
they
very
did not
earth
return.
it touched. She went out
Pryderi,
to prepare a
concerned
vessel
for his
to receive
prized
the precious
hounds,
drops for her
announced
son,
he was going in
Morfrin,
after them.
leaving Guion to his stirring for the
Mabinogion,
final,
his senses
crucial
prickling
moments.
with the scent of
And then,
enchantment,
as
warned
is the
him
way in
against
these
it.
tales,
"This
fate
fortress
intervened.
is not of this
As the
world,
cauldron bubbled
Pryderi,"
with its
he
final,
cautioned.
violent energy,
"The same magic
3
that
drops,
blighted our land
searing
has
hot
laid
and
this
glowing
trap for
with an
you."
inner light,
But
spat
Pryderi,
from the brew.
ever
They
impetuous,
flew through
would
the
not
air
be
and
swayed.
landed squarely upon the
He
thumb
stepped
of
through the
Guion Bach.
gateway into the
Crying
fort's
out from the
central
searing
court.
pain, Guion
There he saw
instinctively
no sign
thrust
of
his
his
thumb into
hounds,
his mouth
nor
to
of the
soothe
white
the
boar.
burn. The moment the
All he
3
saw
drops
was a
touched his
beautiful
tongue,
fountain,
the
and by
universe
its
cracked
side,
open in his
a great
mind.
bowl of
The
purest
past,
gold,
the
fastened
present,
to a
and
marble
the future
slab by
became
heavy
one.
chains.
He understood the secrets
Mesmerized
of the
by its
stars
otherworldly
and the language
beauty,
of the
he
birds.
reached out
He saw
and
the
placed
threads
his
of destiny
hands
that
upon the
bind
golden
all
bowl.
things. He knew
The
the
moment
hearts
his
of men
fingers
and the
touched the
deepest
metal, he
mysteries
was
of the
frozen
earth.
fast.
He was no longer
His
Guion
hand
Bach,
stuck to
the
the
simple
bowl as if
boy.
fused
He was
by
filled
fire.
with the divine light
His
of
feet
Awen.
became
And
fixed
with
to the
this
marble
new
slab
terrifying
beneath him,
clarity,
and he was
he knew
struck
one
dumb,
other thing
unable
with
to utter a
absolute
single
certainty.
cry.
He knew the mind of
Mabinogion waited
Ceridwen.
until
He
sunset,
knew the potion
but
was not
Pryderi
for
did
him.
not return. Heartbroken, he went back to Arbroath and told Rhiannon what had transpired. "You are a poor companion," she chastised him, her fear for her son overriding her gentle nature, "to have lost my only son. Stung by her words and driven by her own fierce love, she went straight to the ghostly fortress. She too saw the golden bowl and her son frozen beside it. "What are you doing here, my son?" she cried, and in her grief, she too reached for the bowl. The same enchantment seized her, and she was trapped, silent and immobile, beside her son. At that very moment, a great peal of thunder cracked the sky, and the fortress, with Pryderi and Rhiannon inside it, vanished as completely as if it had been a dream. Now, Manawydan and Sigfa were truly alone. The gentle Sigfa wept, her spirit broken by the loss of her husband and her mother-in-law. "Do not weep," Manawydan said, his voice a balm of calm in the desolate world. "I will be as good a companion to you as Pryderi ever was. We will survive this." But seeing no hope in Dyfed, he again decided they must try their luck in England. This time, he carried with him a burden of wheat, intending to plant it. He found a field, tilled it, and planted 3 crofts. In time, the wheat grew, the finest, most golden wheat ever seen. The first croft ripened, and Manawydan prepared to harvest it. But when he returned the next morning, he found the entire field bare. Every stalk had been cut and carried away in the night. The same fate befell the second croft. For the third and final croft, Manawydan decided to stand vigil. He armed himself and hid in the darkness, waiting. As midnight struck, he heard a great commotion, a rustling and a scurrying, and saw a vast army of mice descend upon his field. They were no ordinary mice. They swarmed with an unnatural intelligence, each one climbing a stalk, chewing off an ear of corn, and carrying it away. In a fury, he rushed into their midst, but they were too quick and too numerous. He could not catch a single one, save for one mouse that was ponderously slow and heavy. Manawydan seized this one, thrust it into his glove, tied the end, and went back to the empty court of Arbroath. He showed the captured mouse to Sigfa. "What will you do with it?" she asked. "I will hang it," Manawydan declared, his voice grim with resolve. "It is a thief I have caught in the act, and it will suffer a thief's justice." The next day, he went to the Gorsedd Arbroath, that fateful mound, and began to erect a small gallows. As he was preparing the noose, a scholar in threadbare robes approached. "Lord," he said, "what are you doing?" "I am hanging a thief," Manawydan replied. "A mouse?" "I will give you £1 to spare its life," the scholar offered. "I will not," said Manawydan. "It will hang." The scholar departed, and soon a priest on horseback appeared. He too saw the grim preparations. "Lord, this is an unseemly thing. I will give you £3 to let the creature go." "I caught it stealing from me," Manawydan said, his jaw set. "Its fate is sealed." Finally, as Manawydan was placing the noose around the mouse's tiny neck, a bishop with a great retinue appeared. "What madness is this? Name your price for the life of this creature," he demanded. "I will not sell it," Manawydan replied flatly. "Then I will give you £7, the bishop insisted. "No, the 7 horses you see here and their loads." "No, then name your price, man," the bishop cried in exasperation. A slow, knowing look entered Manawydan's eyes. The tension coiled in the air, thick with unspoken magic. He knew now this was no ordinary mouse and no ordinary bishop. "I will," he said, his voice ringing with authority. "First, I demand the release of Rhiannon and Pryderi, unharmed." The bishop, his disguise beginning to waver, hesitated. "It shall be done." "Second," Manawydan continued, his gaze sharp as a hawk's, "I demand to know who you are and who has placed this curse upon Dyfed." The man's form shimmered, and he stood before them as Llwydap Sil Coed, a great magician. "I am a friend of Gwal Fab Clud," he announced, "the man whom Pool, Pryderi's father, humiliated at his wedding feast. It was in revenge for that insult that I cast the enchantment upon Dyft. The mice were my household, transformed, who ravaged your fields, and the one you hold, so slow and heavy, is my own wife, who is with child." A palpable silence descended upon the mound. The very air seemed to crackle as the two men, one a mortal of immense patience, the other a sorcerer of vast power, faced each other. The life of a mouse, heavy with child, hung in the balance, a tiny fulcrum upon which the fate of a kingdom now rested. "And my third and final demand," Manawydan said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous command, his grip on the mouse never slackening, "is that you swear a solemn oath that there shall never again be an enchantment placed upon the 7 cantrips of Dyft, and that there will be no further vengeance sought against Pryderi or Rhiannon or myself." Llwyd's face was a mask of fury and defeat. He was trapped by his own magic, outwitted by the patient wisdom of a landless man. The fate of his wife and the lifting of his great curse rested entirely on this one final promise. The world held its breath, waiting for the magician's answer, wondering if the silent, empty land of Dyft would ever hear the sound of life again. The Tylwyth Teg, their abductions, fairy rings, and hidden realms. Do not mistake them for the diminutive, winged sprites of nursery rhymes. The Tylwyth Teg, the fair folk of Wales, are a race apart. They are tall and noble, with an unearthly grace in every movement. Their beauty is as sharp and breathtaking as a shard of ice. Their hair is the color of spun moonlight or rich, dark soil. Their eyes hold the ancient light of the stars. They are the old nobility of this land, the ones who were here before the first men arrived. And they have never forgotten it. They dwell in kingdoms hidden from mortal sight, in palaces of crystal beneath the cold, clear waters of lonely lakes or in radiant halls deep inside the green, sleeping hills. The veil between their world and ours is thin, and in certain places, at certain times, it wears almost to gossamer. At the liminal hours of dusk and dawn, on the potent eves of Callan Mai and Nos Gallan Geef, the barrier shimmers and weakens. It is then you must be most careful, for it is then you might stumble upon a Sithi Tylwyth, a fairy ring. You may have seen them yourself, a perfect circle of dark green grass in a meadow or a ring of pale, ghostly mushrooms pushing up through the moss. To the foolish, they are a curiosity. To the wise, they are a warning. These rings are not mere fungus. They are portals, thresholds to the lands of the fair folk, and they hum with a music that only the unfortunate can hear. Let me tell you of a lad named Ewan, a shepherd from the slate-grey shoulders of Cater Idris. He was young and headstrong, with more pride than sense, and he believed the old tales were just that, tales to frighten children. One evening, as the sun bled crimson and purple across the western sky, he stayed upon the mountain longer than he ought, searching for a single lost lamb. The air grew still and heavy, and the world seemed to hold its breath. It was then he heard it, a melody played on pipes of reed and harps of silver that seemed to weave itself into the very fabric of the twilight. It was a tune of such heartbreaking beauty and wild, untamed joy that it snagged his very soul. It pulled him forward, his feet moving against his will, the thought of his lost lamb dissolving like mist. The air grew thick with the scent of flowers he could not name, a perfume of intoxicating sweetness. He stumbled into a hidden dell. And there it was, a fairy ring, glowing with a soft, internal light of pale green and silver. And inside, they danced, the Tylwyth Teg, a whirl of ethereal grace and silent laughter. They spun and swayed to the hypnotic music, their feet never seeming to touch the ground, their fine clothes of thistledown and moonbeams flowing around them like water from the circle. A maiden of impossible beauty stepped forth. Her hair was a waterfall of raven black, and her eyes shone with the light of 1,000 captured stars. She smiled, a perfect, inviting smile, and held out a hand that was as pale and slender as a lily. The old warnings whispered by his grandmother on cold winter nights echoed faintly in his mind: never eat their food, never drink their wine, and never, ever join their dance. But her eyes held him captive, and the music drowned all caution. He was a moth drawn to a beautiful, deadly flame. He took her hand. The moment his foot crossed the circle of mushrooms, the world he knew unraveled. The rugged slopes of Cadair Idris vanished. The sky above was not the sky of men, but a celestial dome of swirling indigo and emerald, where the stars and the sun shared the same space in an eternal, shimmering twilight. He stood in a land of impossible beauty, a realm where the colors were sharper, the air vibrated with a palpable magic, and time itself had ceased to have meaning. They led him to a feast in a hall of living wood and luminous crystal, where waterfalls of mead cascaded into silver pools, and the tables were laden with fruits that shone with an inner light. He ate a single, perfect blackberry, and as its sweet, strange juice touched his tongue, the last fading memory of his mortal life, of his flock and his family, was washed away. He danced for what felt like a night of pure, unadulterated bliss, lost in the rhythm and the unearthly beauty of his companions. But a mortal heart cannot bear such perfection forever. A fleeting image, the ghost of a memory, his mother's careworn face, flickered in his mind. The spell was broken. He stopped dancing. The music screeched to a halt. The smiling faces of the Tylwyth Teg turned cold and impassive, their starry eyes now like chips of ice. The beautiful maiden's hand pushed him away, and he found himself stumbling backward, tripping out of the fairy ring, and falling hard upon the cold, familiar earth of the mountain. He blinked, shielding his eyes against the harsh light of a noonday sun. The air was cold, the scent of damp earth and sheep replacing the magical perfume. He felt stiff, his joints aching as if with a great age. Puzzled, thinking he had merely slept, he scrambled to his feet and looked for his flock. But the sheep he saw were marked with an unfamiliar brand. He ran down the mountain path towards his village, but the path was wider, more worn than he remembered. When he reached his home, a terrible dread seized him. The cottages were different. His own family's home, with its thatched roof and crooked door, was gone, replaced by a stern house of cut slate. Strangers looked out at him, their faces filled with a mixture of pity and fear. He cried out his name, asked for his father, his mother. An old man, leaning heavily on a staff, hobbled forward. He peered at Ewan with clouded eyes. "Ewan," the old man rasped, his voice a dry whisper, "there was a story when I was a boy of a young shepherd named Ewan. My own grandfather told it. He vanished from this very mountain one summer's eve. The village searched for weeks, but he was never seen again. They said the Tylwyth Teg had taken him." The world swam before Ewan's eyes. The weight of it, the impossible truth of it, came crashing down. His single night of revelry had been 100 years in the world of men. He looked down at his hands and saw not the strong, calloused hands of a young shepherd, but the wrinkled, liver-spotted skin of an ancient man. The fairy magic that had preserved him now fled his mortal frame. As the old man reached out a trembling hand to touch his shoulder, Ewan let out a sigh, like the last puff of wind from a burst bladder. Before the horrified eyes of the villagers, he crumbled, his body collapsing in on itself, dissolving into a small, pathetic pile of grey dust and brittle bones upon the ground. And so his story ended, but the legend does not. The Tylwyth Teg have not departed from this world.